The following video clips are from the YouTube channel of Rebecca Barrett. Rebecca Barrett is being interviewed by another YouTube channel called Naima B. Robert. I will put links to their channels in these videos in the description. Rebecca talks about what she was like when she was a feminist. After I watched this video, I realized that my 70-something-year-old aunts are practicing toxic feminism. Thus, toxic feminism is not new. It has been around since the 1960s. We never noticed this in the past because we just ignored these types of women. There were not a lot of these types of women back in the 1960s, the 1970s or the 1980s. For example, one of my ex-girlfriend's mothers taught her daughters toxic feminism. Their mother was doing this behavior back in the 1960s. In the 1960s, all of my aunts were young, and this is when they learned his behavior, which is why none of them have ever been able to keep a man. And all of them had bad relationships after bad relationships. I also realized that all the women Mr. Kevin Samuels had difficulties with were all practicing toxic feminism. The need to be right. Always playing the victim even when they know they are wrong. Never taking accountability for their actions. Men are trash. Men are always to blame. Their abusive behavior towards men and thinking it is acceptable to act this way. As Rebecca will explain, indirectly. Dating or being in a relationship with a toxic feminist is like being in a relationship with a person who has schizophrenia and multi-personality disorder. Now today, most of these women are grandmothers, and they have daughters and granddaughters. Thus, there are a lot more of these types of women. And because there are more of them, their voices have become louder to where we can no longer ignore them. Plus, they are teaching good women to act this way. Rebecca says one thing that is very important in this video, and I do not want you to miss it. She said that before they got married, they had pre-marriage counseling. She said that she was no longer a feminist at this time. But her mindset, her way of thinking was still partly feminist. If she had kept this mindset or way of thinking would have killed their marriage. Pre-marriage counseling will inform you of what you are truly dealing with, and if you can truly live with a woman.
New York is the the breeding grounds for toxic feminism. All right.
It sounds like you've been boss babing your way through this, to be fair.
Yes. Yes. And then during my oil and gas career, I was like, oh, these men are annoying. Like, I can't stand them, but I have to work with them. And I was very much one of the guys, right? So I would curse to get the validation of being in the field. These are the things that just to like be one of the boys, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
to be more masculine, right?
To be more masculine. Exactly. And that was the first time I had cut my hair all off because I didn't want to appear feminine. I wanted them to respect me and I didn't want them to objectify me in the field. I always loved Mad Max and I liked Charlize Theron in it and like the shaved head. And she was always, you know, figuring it out. Badass, right?
Right.
And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to portray that so desperately. But that's not my essence. I'm a very empathetic person. I literally am an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. So when I would get feedback, which was constructive feedback, I internalized everything, broke down, like, you know, needed space from other people, loved being around other people, but needed to get away and like be isolated for 2 days after that. Fast forward, I'm in New York, the breeding ground for toxic feminism. And I start really deep diving into the ideology. You know, you're a part of all these women's groups. You're a part of these boss babe network. I had to be at every event. I had to be this persona of a boss babe when inside I was like crumbling. I was playing this fictional character that I had created, right? And I was miserable. And mind you, like this was for years of doing this. Feminism really makes women ugly. Like you're ugly on the inside and it translates to ugliness on the outside. Okay. And I talk to friends and family members and they're like, Rebecca, you're a miserable person to be around. And I was also lonely, you know, I had pushed so many men away. I wanted to compete with men. I had this this attitude against them, like I was better than them. Everyone's telling me I have to blame everyone else, but this doesn't make sense. Like I have to make my own bed, right? Like, and that concept really stuck with me. I'm like, if I'm unhappy, that's a reflection of my choices. And that's when the real work started to begin for me. And I was like, okay.
You were trying to have heterosexual relationships at this time as well?
Yes.
How did you even manage that? Like, how did that even make sense?
It was interesting because until I met my husband, I was like, why do all the men just steer away from me? Like, I would get into relationships, right? But then after a couple weeks or a couple months, it was like they didn't want to be around me. I would self-destruct. Essentially, I'd be like, this is too good. I need to cause a ruckus, chaos. And that's what I realized, that I was like, every relationship that I've been in, I'm the one that made it destruct. And I thought about that. I was like, because when you reflect, like when you actually have time to reflect on these things, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm the problem. And then your whole world starts blowing up. Yeah.
Sounds like accountability. Sounds like kryptonite. What is this? Oh no. Wow.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And it didn't happen right away. It took time and it took effort, right? It took effort from me because it's really easy to just be like, okay, cool, like still not my fault, just blame everyone. yeah, like it's fine. Like
yeah, exactly.
Men suck, it's the patriarchy, and that's the go-to response, right? That's what feminism teaches you as the go-to response. Right. And they're very crafty about this too. It's very well designed and well thought out. And yeah, I bought into it. But then after I started having my own accountability, I started the more masculine I became, or the more I was in my masculine frame, the less happy I was, the more resentful I was, and the more combative and competitive that I was. It was constantly battling my feminine energy with my masculine energy. And I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm an empath. So meaning I am very emotional, and I also take other people's emotions and absorb it like a sponge. So I'm very in tune with these things. And being a female CEO and living in my masculine frame, I was miserable. Okay. I was constantly questioning myself. Why am I so emotional? Why can't I just be one of these other women who understand and get it, who can fight and who can pitch the same way that men do? I was always battling myself, and I was always questioning myself why I couldn't be more aggressive or why I couldn't be more competitive. I had lived a lot of this career life very, very single because I resented men. I didn't like being around men. And the only men that I had really were my buddies. There was no one that I was essentially attracted to. So I started reading books, right? I started to work on myself. I discovered that I was a highly sensitive person. I got some therapy around that, I discovered that, I am more sensitive to things and I care about people, and that's just how I am. And I learned to embrace who I was, right? Who I was created to be. And I learned how to take personal accountability for my actions. I knew that I wasn't the victim. I was taught that I had to be the victim. I'm blaming and shifting the blame onto other people when it's something that I had to do, that I had to put in the work. And all of that was happening at the same time that I met my now husband. And the more I started working on myself, the more I realized I was creating a lot of the issues within our relationship. I would get upset with him on things that he didn't even know he was doing and all of this other stuff. During our engagement process, we were encouraged to pursue premarital counseling. Now, I didn't want to do premarital counseling, okay? Premarital counseling to me was like, why would we do this? We can just get married. Well, let me tell you, premarital counseling was probably the thing that saved our relationship and taught us the roles of a wife and a husband. Through that work with our counselor, with doing one-on-ones, I realized that I was still very much in my feminist mindset, right? I had worked on myself. I thought I was doing all this stuff. And I realized that I needed to take on the role. If I wanted to be a wife, I needed to take on the role of a wife. And what does that mean, right? A wife is submissive to her husband. My husband leads in my relationship. Does that mean that I am a doormat? Does that mean that I'm a slave to him? Does that mean that I do everything that he says? Absolutely not. And that is what is probably the biggest detriment to women, because that is what they believe. They think that being submissive means that a man can just walk all over you. And if that's the case, no, I'm sorry. I'm here to tell you guys that being submissive, all that means is having trust in your husband's decision-making skills, having that ability to lean on your husband and letting him take the lead in the household. I'm his co-pilot, right? But we both have to share our opinions. We both have to share in the conversation. And then at the end of the day, he makes the final decision. And it's also understanding the roles we play in our relationship. Communicating what your roles are before you get married will set the expectations for your marriage. My husband is the main breadwinner in our relationship. Now, if your husband loves to cook, right, then he can cook the dinners. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to communicate with one another what these roles are before we sign the dotted line. And so that is what submission, and that's what being a wife to me actually means. It's also taking care of myself. I make sure that I look good for my husband, not because, I need to look a certain way for him, but I want him to want me. I want my husband to desire me. I don't want him to look outside of the house. I don't want him to look to other women. It is so refreshing when you have a man, a masculine man, that can take on his masculine form and I can then move into my feminine form and we can complement each other. We don't compete with each other. We don't. Because once we started competing with each other, we had a lot more issues. Why would I compete with my husband? We're on the same team, right? We're on the exact same team. We are working towards the same goals. That is the beauty of marriage. That is the beauty of relationship. And that's what I want to encourage more women and more men to have. I want to encourage you. You don't have to take the world on your shoulders. You don't have to take on everything and be this powerhouse. It's exhausting. Finding a man that can allow you to rest and allow you to take off some of that load is so amazing that I want other women to understand and realize that and look for that.